Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Thank you for tuning in to this live broadcast tonight. I appreciate you taking the time to hang out, and I'm sure some of you will probably won't see this until tomorrow morning. Tonight we're going to discuss this great contradiction that has always existed in those who are claiming to, be Afro-Centric and pro-black, and yet they are anti-Islam. And they have several reasons for claiming their opposition to Islam. Now, if someone is, if they don't understand the religion of Islam, that's one thing. But the attacks have been kind of vicious. And in particular, this recent attack is against people who have already attacked Islam in general, and now they are attacking the Nation of Islam. Particularly, they have a slanderous effort towards the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad and his student, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. So I find this to be odd that around the same time as the minister is being attacked in the mass media, that these type of attacks, personal attacks, will come from what we would say is the underground. That's like a military strategy where someone attacks from overhead, which is the airwaves and the mass media, and then someone comes from the underground, from people claiming to be from, the hood and from among our people. So this is what we're witnessing at this particular moment. So what we want to deal with is some of their arguments in an intelligent manner, because if you listen to the attacks of these presenters, I won't name them, because a lot of time that's what they want. They want the fame, they want the notoriety, they want to look like they're some bold person for standing up against somebody who's supposedly doing evil to the black community, and standing up against something that is bad for black people or bad for African people. So they want to position themselves as this bold spokesperson who stands up for the dark people of the earth. So so let's deal with some of their arguments. First among them is their argument against Islam in general. They claim that Islam was spread among black people by Arabs, and Arabs came, running through Africa, forcing Islam on black people, and that if they didn't convert, they would kill them, and nothing could be further from the truth. When you deal with the earliest days of Islam, black people were there, and black people came willingly. You know the story of Bilal, but again, Bilal wasn't the only Habashi, which was the name they used for Ethiopian, inside of Arabia. There were plenty of them. As I said in a recent presentation, the king of Aksum used to rule southern Yemen in the Arabian Peninsula. Habashis have always ruled southern Yemen periodically. And, they all speak a Semitic language. When the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, had to flee Mecca from the Quraysh, he sent some of his Sahaba to present-day Eritrea, and they had protection by the Habashi king there, the king of Aksum. And not only did they have protection, it is said arguably that the first mosque or masjid ever built is the Sahaba Masjid in Eritrea. Some say the first masjid was built in Yathrib, which is now known as Medina, or the city of the Prophet, peace be upon him. But however, the first two masjids ever built in the world is either in Eritrea or Medina in the Arabian Peninsula. They were built around the same time. So that right there tells you that Islam has been in Africa from the very, very beginning of the mission of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So it didn't spread in Africa by the sword. When they heard the message, a lot of them began to come to Islam. Over that 23-year period, Islam began to spread in the Horn of Africa. And later on, you have the Umayyad conquest, where the Muslims did sweep through North Africa, but these were not just Arabs. You know, according to Western historians, they like to say that Arabs came through. No, there were, you know, Habashi, there were Ethiopians, there were even some Somalis, there were African Muslims that were involved in the Umayyad Empire, in the Umayyad army that came across North Africa. And no, they weren't interested in converting black people. First of all, North Africa you have a lot of nomadic tribes. It's not considered Black Africa even. It's not considered Sub-Saharan Africa. This is North Africa, which was once ruled by the Romans, once ruled by the Persians, once ruled by Constantinople. So these had kingdoms, not kingdoms, but they had governments that was connected to Europe. A lot of these North African provinces were once client states of Europe. So these were well-developed states. So when the Umayyads came through, they were looking for these type of empires to bring into their empire. And they were successful, in conquering North Africa. And they didn't want to convert the people to Islam, because if you know anything about the way the Islamic governments run, if you have non-Muslims, they pay the tax. According to the Quran, Allah says in the Quran, had we wanted to make all men believers, we would have. So will you then force men to believe? So they weren't into forcing men into believing. If you didn't want to believe, fine, just pay the tax. So you could be a Jew in North Africa. There were Jews, there were Christians, and they lived under the Umayyads, and some of them welcomed the Muslim rulers because the Umayyads treated them better than their own Christians. I'm talking about some of the North African Christians who were persecuted by the government in Constantinople, which is current Turkey. And because they were persecuted by them, when the Umayyads came, they had more freedom to practice their North African Christianity the way they wanted to practice it. And they actually welcomed the Umayyad conquest. If you know about the Donatist people, the North African Christians called the Donatists, they were slaughtered by the government in Constantinople. So when the Umayyads came, they were protected. They weren't slaughtered for being Christians. They weren't slaughtered for being Jews, those who were Jews in North Africa. So the Umayyad conquest was actually welcomed by a lot of the native people. Excuse me. So then you go into Islamic Spain, and its experience was very similar. There were Jews there who were being persecuted, and it was the Muslims who protected the Jews inside southern Spain. So, the Muslims actually armed the Jews to defend themselves in southern Spain. So there was a harmonious relationship between the Muslims, Christians, and Jews in southern Spain. But going back to Africa, most people who converted in Africa, they converted a lot of times because, one, they liked the religion, they heard the religion, the teachings of Islam, and they joined on to it. And the way it works in Africa, when a tribal chief joins on to Islam, everybody in that tribe or that clan, they begin to join on too. So this is why you have situations like going back to East Africa, where you have, the Somalis. They say to be Somali is to be Muslim. So here you have a whole African tribe. That's why when you insult Islam, you're insulting whole tribes in Africa. To be Somali is to be Muslim. 99% of Somalis are Muslim. On the west coast of Africa, you have the Fulani. And to be Fulani is to be Muslim. Fulani is 99% Muslim. You have whole tribes that are Muslim. A lot of the Oromo people, they're Muslim. This is, half of Africa, 53% of Africa are Muslim. So to insult the Islamic tradition is to insult a native tradition to many, many Africans, over half of Africa. So let's go a little bit further into history. And a lot of these who insult Islam, they will love to talk about the Moors and how the Moors conquered Spain and so forth and so on, and totally miss the fact that the Moors were Muslim. The Berbers who went, the North African Berbers who went and conquered Spain, they were Muslim. Some of you love to talk about Mansa Musa, the richest man who ever lived. He was a Muslim. And he became famous because he was the king of ancient Takrur in Mali. And he spread his wealth on his way to make Hajj to Mecca. That's how he became famous. And the fact that he was protected with all that gold going from Hajj to Mecca, because when you came into the Dar al-Islam, you were able to attain great wealth, and your wealth was protected under the Dar al-Islam. In other words, you had Africans on the west coast, let's go to the ancient Takrur, ancient Mali, who were producing textiles, who were producing cloth and fabric for carpets, for clothing, for couches and for many other uses. These textiles, once the Takrur, who are known as Fulani today, came into the Dar al-Islam, they were able to sell their cloth, their clothing, such as this. This tablecloth is actually made in Africa, made in Guinea. So, things like this were able to be sold from the west coast of Africa, all across North Africa, all the way into East Africa, all the way into Arabia. So these little things that Africans would make for themselves now became a commodity that can be sold all the way across North Africa and all the way up into Europe in, Islamic Spain. So Islam actually enriched Africans when they came into the abode of Islam. So here you have the ancient Takrur, who also sold Arabian horses, which were prize horses because they were cattle breeders. They sold their cows. They sold, their gold. You have to excuse me for a second. I'm going to take a drink of water. My throat is becoming very dry. Pardon me for 1 second. Okay, sorry about that. All right, so here you had Africans becoming very, very extremely wealthy under the Dar al-Islam. So ancient Mali with all of their gold. Mansa Musa gave it away, shook the whole economy up. But again, you have Afrocentrics who love to claim these type of leaders, but then they hate the religion that made these leaders who they were. When you look at The Lion King, which is one of the most famous stories at this time, The Lion King is the story of Sanjata. Sanjata was also a Muslim. When you look at ancient Timbuktu, which, that's a pride of Africa, that was one of the most literary societies on earth. Timbuktu was Muslim. You don't have Timbuktu without Islam. The University of Timbuktu was founded by Mansa Musa in Timbuktu. In order to become a scholar in Timbuktu, you first start with the Holy Quran. Every scholar in Timbuktu was a Muslim. But then let's go back to Islamic Spain. We love to talk about the Moors and claim the Moors, and all these sciences, mathematics and astronomy, came from the study of Quran, came from the light of the Quran. And from there, those sciences was hashed out into the universities set up by the Moors, and that the sciences of the Quran are the basis of Western education. 2/3 of the stars have Arabic names, so all your astronomy classes comes out of Islam. The mathematics, most of the higher mathematics, trigonometry, algorithm, algebra, comes out of Islam. The first book of animals was written by a black Muslim, Al-Jahiz, Kitab al-Alawan. The book of animals comes out of the Islamic world. So zoology comes out of the Islamic world. So you have all of this knowledge, all of this science coming from Islam and coming from black people in Islam as well. But you have these that love Africa, but hate Islam. The first constitutional government, I won't say the first, but on the west coast of Africa, before America was even formed, was in Futajalan. So here you had a constitutional democracy on the west coast of Africa, before America even had a constitutional democracy. This is the type of intelligence, and that was an Islamic government, the theocratical government of Futajalan. It was an Islamic government. So, the richest man, even in recent times, Muammar Gaddafi, before he was killed, he was the richest man alive, African and Muslim. And so many Pan-Africanists, they love Gaddafi. Gaddafi gave us the African Union. He funded the African Union. And today, there still is an African Union thanks to Muammar Gaddafi. And not to mention the many contributions throughout Africa. So it is really like so silly to be, to call yourself a Pan-Africanist or pro-African and to be a hater of Islam. It just doesn't make sense, because so much greatness came from under the umbrella of Islam as far as black people are concerned, African people are concerned. Now, let's come to America. So a lot of our ancestors from Muslim West Africa, excuse me, sorry about that. A lot of our Muslims from our ancestors from West Africa were brought here because Muslims had the knowledge of agriculture, they had the knowledge of textiles, they had the knowledge of architecture. As you know, it was the black slaves who built this whole city of Washington, D.C., designed it, built the White House, everything you see there in Washington, D.C., this knowledge of architecture was already among us. It wasn't taught to us when we got here and then we used it. No, we already had it. We had the cattle herding skills. Everything that made the American economy rich, most of it, a whole lot of it, came out of Muslim West Africa. Even right here in New York, you go to the African burial grounds, you will see the alawal, the tablet that we write Quran on, that was brought here by the Muslim West Africans. I even saw the doleki. I have one here, the doleki that they wear in Futajalan, which is a Fulani clothing. You find that down there right here in New York City at the African burial grounds. Most of the graves are facing northeast, which is, Mecca. And, and I asked one of the workers there, and they said, 90% of the graves in the African burial ground was facing northeast, which means 90% of them were Muslim. And even there they try to deny, they play down the Islamic presence in the movie that they show when you go there. And, but you hear this little girl singing, La ilaha illallah. But the way she's singing it, it just sounds like la, 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 la. But it's la ilaha illallah. And she says, Mamadu Rasulullah. And, Mamadu, you find a lot of Fulani people, like the brother, may Allah be pleased with him, who was shot 41 times. His name was Mamadou Jallo. In West African tradition, Mamadou is Muhammad. That's how they say Muhammad. So when you hear that little girl singing, la, 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 Mamadou, she's saying, la ilaha illallah, Muhammad is his messenger. The other myth that these Afro-centrists who are anti-Islamic like to spread, they like to say that, Islam took away our African culture. And that is not true. It took away our African names. That is not true. You'll find, West African Muslims, their name will still be Maiga, which is a native African name, or if they're Fulani, their name will still be Ba, their name will still be Jallo, their name will be So. They'll still have their African name, they'll have their Muhammad, but they'll have their African name. They still have their traditional African clothing. Even their kufi will be an African-style kufi. They'll wear African-style boo-boo. So no, it didn't take away the African culture. It just put an Islamic overlay on the African culture, but it's still African culture. The Dar al-Islam had that type of diversity and prided itself in its diversity. You have Chinese Muslims that have their Chinese culture, but they still have their Islamic overlay with their Chinese culture. You have Indians that have an Islamic overlay with their Indian culture. And it's the same in Africa. They have the Islamic overlay, but it is an African culture, an African cultural tradition. So we brought that here. So again, when you insult Islam, you're insulting your ancestors who came here. You're saying to them that, you're smarter than they are. And, and they were just some slaves of Arabs. They were unintelligent. And this is an insult to your ancestors. And it's an insult, again, to over half of Africa. 53% of Africa is Muslim. So then you come here to recent times, to the resurgence of Islam underneath with the coming of Master Farad Muhammad and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and then later on his student, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. This attack, this slanderous attack on these men is, cannot be anything else other than to help those who wish to stop the influence of Islam. There's no way you can do this in the name of uplifting black people. Like, how could you possibly think it's a good thing to try to tear down the Nation of Islam? And, one of these presenters said that, oh, after today, the Nation of Islam is done. And I laughed. I'm like, oh, really? You really think your slander is that strong that you could destroy the Nation of Islam with it? I don't think so. So, but there's no way you could be putting forth this type of slander in the name of uplifting black people. How could you say something like the Nation of Islam that's taking people off of drugs, helping people to break their addiction to nicotine, rebuilding the black family structure, putting the black man back at the head of the family? How could attacking the Nation of Islam in any way be good for black people? How could slandering the leaders of the Nation of Islam in any way be good for black people, when there are so many young men who are being taken from a life of crime and being upstanding citizens in America? How could you attack that type of work and use the type of foul language that you're using in the name of uplifting black people and defending black people against this evil? How is this an evil when, you're taking brothers who used to sell drugs and destroy their community and making them upright black men who are uplifting their community? So these individuals in no way have the best interests of the black community in mind. If you truly are for African tradition, if you are truly for black people, then again, you have to show and prove. Slandering the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and the basis of their slander is that they claim that he had underage wives, so this makes him, immoral. Let me tell you something. This is white man standard. You cannot claim to be Afro-Centric and use a white man's standard to judge an elder in your community, a noble leader in your community, with a moral standard set up by white people. It is the white man who puts an age limit on, once a girl gets past puberty, she can't be married and so forth and so on. And we follow that law, yes, because we are in the West, and that's a sensible law in the West. We believe in marrying within our age group and so forth and so on because, that's our tradition here. That's how we're raised. We are not in disagreement with that. But you can't say that you are defending African tradition. Oh, no. You go to any African village, you'll find plenty of elders married to young women, teenage women. You'll find plenty of scholars and noblemen all throughout Africa and the Middle East that are married to, young women, teenage women. So if that is what you're using as a moral standard, then you're using, again, a white man's moral standard to judge one of your own people. And you're slandering a noble leader among black people based on a European moral standard. And these are some of the most immoral people on the planet. And you're using their standard to slander the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. So that's the first thing. And the main part of the presentation is the slander of the domestic life of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. But yet, you claim Malcolm X. Without the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, there is no Malcolm X. You can't change that. No matter how hard you try, there would be no Malcolm X without the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Without the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, there's no Muhammad Ali. Without the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, there's no Louis Farrakhan. Without the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, there's no 5% Nation. And without Master Muhammad, there is no Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Without the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, there is no black power. Nobody had black pride until the Honorable Elijah Muhammad popularized the term black. Before, black people would not use or call themselves black. No. Marcus Garvey had the Universal Negro Improvement Association, and he, in bringing pride to our people, white folks would spell Negro with a small n, and he capitalized the letter N. Negro with the capital N. That was his way of giving us pride. But it was the Honorable Elijah Muhammad that said we are black people, and that black is universal, because you have black people in India, you have black people in China, you have black people who are the original people of Europe, black people in the West Indies. So when you said black, you're saying universal. So how could you, in the name of black power, slander the man who gave you the term black in the first place? So this is the ridiculous, contradiction of these who claim that they're standing up for black people, and they're slandering those who have the longest track record of uplifting and reforming black people. The industries of the Nation of Islam. It was the Nation of Islam that first, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, that gave us independent black education, not funded by any white group. We are proud of all the charter schools, but the Honorable Elijah Muhammad schools were funded by black people, so they were independent black education. So you have the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to thank for independent black education. He's the first to take his children out of school and went to jail to find, to start independent black education. You have the independent media, press. Muhammad Speaks, which was the #1 black publication in all of America, circulating over 1 million copies. This is an accomplishment that was not accomplished by any other leader. Not to mention the farmland, producing our own products, producing our own shoes, producing our own clothes, taking us out of the white man's kitchen. Today we're eating all of this poisonous food that's killing us, but the Honorable Elijah Muhammad gave us wholesome food produced by our own people on our own farms. So all of this great work, and you're going to slander him based on a white man's moral standard in the name of uplifting black people? Now, if you disagree with his domestic life, that's between him and Allah. Let Allah judge whether his domestic life was correct or not. That is not for you. What you should be saying is, I'm grateful to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad for giving us Malcolm X. Some of you love Khalid Abdul Muhammad, but you hate his teacher, Farrakhan. How could you? This is the man that produced Khalid Abdul Muhammad. So even though, you disagree and you taking Khalid Abdul Muhammad's side, know that there is no Khalid Abdul Muhammad without the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. So if you benefit from any of the students of the teacher, whether you disagree with the teacher or not, the respectful thing to do, the African tradition thing to do, is to respect your elders, respect your leaders, and give honor to them and thank them for those personalities that were produced from their mind. So I'm going to stop here, and because there's so much more that we can say on this. But I would encourage everyone to not stoop to that low level of returning slander for slander. Hopefully these young brothers, if they're sincere, they will come to the light of truth, and come to the light of of honor and respect that we must have among us as a people if we're going to rise out of this condition. And with all of the attacks that are on black people today, then we need not to be slandering each other and trying to tear down our traditional black organizations as a thing of pride. No, we should be doing everything to support them. And if we disagree with them, then let us start something that's better than what they are doing and show our people a better example instead of tearing down something or attempting to tear down something that has proven to do good for our people. So thank you for listening. Thank you for taking the time to listen. I hope you learned something from this. I hope it was enlightening to you. And may Allah continue to bless us. Assalamu alaikum. Peace.